Loving greetings and pranams, all you dear souls who have gathered here today, sannyasis and devotees of YSS, teachers, students, administrative staff of this blessed educational institution, our esteemed colleagues in the educational community from Ranchi, thank you so much for joining us to share our joy on this momentous day. You know, in a work such as our Gurudev brought to the world, a divine mission, a great divine dispensation, milestones such as the inauguration of these facilities today, what we're seeing is the culmination for who can even say when the original concept in the divine consciousness took form and gradually gathered the energy of the great Om vibration flowing down from the higher lokas to higher spheres. And as you all came into the hall, filled this hall today, I couldn't help but feel that this hall was literally being inundated with that flow, a holy divine vibration energy that comes from the divine mind and has so beautifully manifested in form through the efforts of all of those who we have thanked just now. So take a moment, I want you to feel that flow because I feel it in each of you. Feel each of your hearts and souls opening to allow that flow of divine consciousness, that divine vibration to wash over you, to uplift your consciousness, to renew your spirit so that we can leave this dedication, each of us having tasted a little bit of that divine vision that our Gurudev has planted in the ether and wishes to cultivate in the hearts and bodies and minds and souls of so many young students who will pass through these halls on their way to embark on their life's journey. I want to begin just with a powerful statement that he gave, which I believe encapsulates much of the vision that we're talking about. This is for all of you teachers, staff, administrators, and certainly for all the parents who are hearing this talk. Guruji said very simply, he said, it lies in the hands of today's adults to uplift the citizens of tomorrow by educating the children into a balanced life. He chose his words well. Then he went on to say, to save the future of the world by saving the children. The modern adult must wake up and cultivate a balanced life of spiritual as well as material habits. That is what these YSS schools aspire to impart. I want to share a little story that I remember from many years ago that so much encapsulates the vision that's coming into manifestation on this joyous and wonderful day. It's a story about a father who had a little daughter, probably preteen, school child, no doubt like many of those who we have here on the campus. And so the father had come home from work one day, and of course the little girl really wanted to spend some time with her papa. And unfortunately, he had brought with him a fair amount of work that he intended to do at home that evening. And so he didn't want to put her off, of course. So he thought, well, I'll give you a little puzzle. I'll give you a task. And he pulled out the newspaper from the table nearby. And on one sheet of the newspaper, there was a full-page image of the Earth, of the globe, with all of the boundaries of the countries and continents fully visible there. And so he said to his little daughter, now, look, he took it and then he he tore it into lots of little puzzle pieces. And then he gave her the pieces and say, now, you've learned in geography, right? You know where India is? Yes, Daddy. You know where South America is? Yes. You know where Europe and Australia and so on. All right, you go and assemble those pieces back and bring it back to me when you're done. And he thought, well, now I have a reasonable amount of time, maybe an hour or two to work on these things that I brought home. Well, it wasn't but 10 or 15 minutes or shorter. She came back and said, all done. And he looked at it and he was amazed. And he said, how did you do that so fast? And she had a secret. She said, well, Papa, you didn't realize, but on the backside of that huge map of the earth, there was this nice image of this beautiful husband and wife. And so I couldn't remember all of the boundaries of the countries and the names and the continents and so on, but it was really easy. I just put the man and woman right and the world was right. So I say that it's a sweet story, but I say that because to me it's incredibly significant that as we dedicate this beautiful educational complex today, that we keep in mind that in fact it was the sponsorship of the government of our beloved India that has made so much of it possible through the grant. It's very important. Now, why do I say that? Because the government, in this context, being the political representative of the Indian nation, and therefore, to me, the funding of this visionary educational complex is a powerful affirmation by the nation as a whole of the truth that Paramahansaji illumined for us in his autobiography of a yogi when he said, a land lives not by its material accomplishments, but by its masterpieces of man. You remember that part in the autobiography? It's a powerful, powerful tribute to the spiritual vitality, the spiritual longevity, spiritual as well as material of the Indian culture and nation. And he went on to point out, he said, gone are the empires of these other mighty nations that were so skilled in the arts of war that once were India's contemporaries. Ancient Egypt, Babylon, Greece, Rome, the list goes on. And then he said these beautiful words. He said, though India possesses a civilization more ancient than that of any other country, few historians have noted that her feat of survival is by no means an accident. It's a logical incident in the record of India's devotion to the eternal verities, eternal truths that India has offered through her best men in every generation. India has given the worthiest answer of any people to the challenge of time. And then he went on, as I said, to say, a land lives not in its material achievements, but in its masterpieces of humanity. Heeding such persuasions, India has proved herself not witless against the thousand cunnings of time. Self-realized masters in every century have hallowed her soil. Modern Christ-like sages like Lahiri Mahashaya and Swami Sri Yukteswar rise up to proclaim that a knowledge of yoga, the science of God realization, is vital to man's happiness and to a nation's longevity. Doesn't that thrill you to step back and have that perspective that we are not just dedicating a building, we're not just dedicating, as impressive and beautiful as they are, an educational complex, but we are today participating in that millennia-long from ages past and millennia looking forward far into the future of India's divinely ordained role on the stage of this earth life. Through the power of her spirituality, through the power, as Guruji has said, of her devotion to truth, devotion to Dharma, to Sanatana Dharma. So in a nutshell, to create those masterpieces of humanity. That is the goal. That is the motivating, the animating impulse of any spiritual education, and certainly the spiritual education that our Guruji wished and devoted so much of his time, so much of his prodigious energy and cosmic consciousness to bringing into manifestation on this and other campuses. Let's step back just a little further even. Because I want to acknowledge this dedication, this inauguration of these educational facilities, as I said, in the context of India's glorious contribution to the human family, to the global family. In the middle of the 20th century, there was a very renowned and famous historian, student of world history, author, and so on, Arnold Toynbee. And he was renowned as an expert about the world in general. In fact, when the Shankaracharya of Puri, back in 1957-58, His Holiness Sri Bharati Krishna Tirtha visited the West, first time ever that a Shankaracharya had left the shores of India and traveled to the United States. He enjoyed a dialogue with this Arnold Toynbee at one of the universities. But here's what Toynbee said, and keep in mind, he's not from India, of course. He's obviously not a Hindu, not a yogi. In fact, in later years, some of his works came under some mild criticism as being biased from the Christian Western point of view. But that only makes what he says about India all the more powerful. And he said this when writing, this was in the 1950s, when the World War II had recently concluded with the inauguration of the horrific and yet momentous and epoch-making atomic age, with its weapons of mass destruction, but also with its promise of great human progress that could be materialized through further unlocking the secrets of Mother Nature, of Prakriti. So Toynbee said this. He said at the beginning of the atomic age, it is already becoming clear that a chapter in world history that had a Western beginning will have to have an Indian ending if it is not to end in the self-destruction of the human race. At this supremely dangerous moment in human history, the only way of salvation for mankind is the Indian way. Emperor Ashoka's the Indian way, Emperor Ashoka's and Mahatma Gandhi's principle of nonviolence, and Sri Ramakrishna's testimony to the harmony of all religions. And as I said, he wrote this in the early 1950s. If he were writing even a decade or so later, no doubt he would have included the similar contribution, the similar momentous and epoch-making contribution of Sri Sri Paramahansa Yoganandaji. But Toynbee went on to say about this Indian way, here we have an attitude and a spirit that can make it possible for the human race to grow together into a single family. And in the atomic age, that is the only alternative to destroying ourselves. Quite a testimony from someone who was not of had no Indian leanings or persuasion, but just as an observer of world history. So what is that Indian way? The four limbs of our Gurudev's educational program, his educational philosophy, the educational platform. He took that coming from India's shores, sent by his guru and param gurus to the quote-unquote materialistic West. He distilled that Indian way into the set of practical how to live skills, which so many of us have built our lives around, learning them from the YSS and SRF lessons, and that also form a foundation and underpinning for the educational ideals embodied in this institution. Again, it's balanced development of body, mind, and soul. There's the science of the body, and then what he called mental engineering. He elaborated that by saying developing that the ability to use the mind to construct bridges over the chasms of failure. And all of the other tools that a properly trained and properly focused and properly guided and honed set of mental faculties can produce in the lives of those who study that mental engineering. And then social arts, the arts of getting along with each other, the arts of as we referred to earlier, of gradually forming out of our diverse personalities and interests and self-interests and aspirations, a working, dynamic, give and take harmony that gradually, as history continues to unfold, out of that will emerge a greater unity among the global family. And then lastly, that he didn't call it religion. I want to point that out. He called this the fourth limb of this program, applied spiritual science. Isn't that wonderful? And because these principles are not sectarian, they are universal, they're applicable to all. And he took that, he took those four limbs that I mentioned. This is the distilled essence of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, of the profound and holy Bhagavad Gita, which itself, as he tells us, is the essence of Vedas and Upanishads. So many of you and all of us on the stage here, and those who are following our program from video link and celebrating this day with us, we have proved in our lives that this is not a matter of religious dogma or belief or superstition. This applied spiritual science is truly transformative. And it's so wonderful to connect what Guruji brought, first to the West, and then rebounding back to his beloved India, as more and more people in India were able to watch the great success, the great interest, the great enthusiasm that he was able to kindle in the souls of hundreds of thousands of Westerners around the world. And that in itself was a fantastic accomplishment. But equally impressive is, as I said, with this circle then rebounded and became complete, as devotees such as yourselves in India then looked at your own millennial heritage with a new appreciation. And so many of our devotees in the YSS and Kendras and Mandalis and ashrams around India can bear witness to the link that he has provided from that purest, pristine descent of divine consciousness and light and joy, which is the science of yoga from the earliest times, the golden ages of India's past civilization, and bringing that into our modern 21st century as a powerful, realistic, doable answer to the challenges that confront us. So that is what we are founding these educational institutions, and we take that from those lofty precepts, and we, all of you especially, teachers, staff, administrators, I bow to you, because you are the ones that find the way to introduce individually to each of the students that comes before you, each one to whose education and care and upbringing is entrusted to you in these classrooms. It's for you to take, with your creativity, your ingenuity, your love, and translate those eternal, grand, marvelous, eternal truths into something that can inform and guide and mold the lives of these dear students. You know, it's said that an institution is the lengthened shadow of one man. Emerson said that, the philosopher. And in that sense, obviously, our revered Paramahansa Yoganandaji is that towering figure whose spiritual influence and whose practical influence and light resonates throughout this institution. In all these decades, since 1917 until this very day, and going on into far beyond the lifetimes of any of us, may his spirit always be the animating force behind everything that this organization does, including these wonderful educational complexes. It's very interesting, though, because Guruji, as we know about his life and get to know him not just as an abstract historical figure, but as a divinely beloved, so humanly charming personality, it's easy to wonder that and to agree that he's really not the kind of person that you would expect to have founded a large network of educational institutions. And he wrote about this in autobiography. He said, "I was never a model pupil myself." And so he said, I had, because of that, ready sympathy for all the boyish pranks and problems. But then he said, very early on in my career as an educator, I discovered that the boys who may impishly delight in outwitting a teacher will cheerfully accept discipline and rules that are set by their fellow students. I want to share this vignette, this example of his teaching style. And we can do only so much in defining principles and methodologies and structures to guide an institution. That's what institutions are made of. But by themselves, institutions can become mausoleums if they are not continuously infused with that living spark of divine humanity. So here's just one example of how he worked with the students. He said, I had observed in one of the missionary schools in India that the priest, the teacher, was giving a Bible class, and the students were uncontrollable, disruptive noise and unruliness, because the teacher was trying to force onto them this view of religious dogma. And they made fun of it among themselves. So years later, Guruji said, in my own school, I made up my mind that I wouldn't force anything on the students. And he said part of the curriculum was to discuss the different qualities taught and mentioned in the scriptures. For instance, the study of why we shouldn't be greedy. So when I taught these classes, the students found them so interesting that they purposely never rang the bell on time to dismiss the class. And I would ask them things like this. He said, what is it called when you disregard the fact that your body doesn't want nutrition and you don't need any more food, and yet you go on eating? The answer is greed. And what is the result of greed? The answer is indigestion. And when you keep on overloading the body, what happens? The answer is chronic indigestion. And then what does that bring? The answer is sickness or maybe even early death. So summing it up, should we be greedy? And all the children at once, no. So he tapped into that enthusiasm, which is really, for as any teacher will know, that enthusiasm, that native endowment. Children are born in this life already and ready to receive, ready to learn mode if it's not disrupted by unfortunate circumstances. And that's what that enthusiasm is. That Guruji, more than any of the other educational precepts and programs and sets of curricula and so on, he wanted his teachers, he wanted his schools to keep that divine spark of enthusiasm. That's what enthusiasm means. It means that presence of divine consciousness and theos within each individual. And he said, when the boys of my school went back to their homes for a vacation, the parents didn't have to force any rules on them. They had learned how to behave. Because I didn't tell them, do this, do that. I knew that when the boys are told not to do something, they all the more want to do it. So I said to them when they came to the school, this is your home. I'm not going to police you because I want you to learn to govern yourselves. My duty is to explain to you why it is in your best interest to behave in a certain way, why you shouldn't be greedy or steal or fight with others and so on. And then he said, when these things were understood by the boys, then they made stricter rules for themselves than any that I had put in place. And as a result, I have had a most successful school. So I wanted to share in some detail just that in that one little glimpse, we see so much of that. Again, I can't overemphasize this quality that our institutions must always nurture, must always remind ourselves to check periodically and see, are we remaining in touch with that divine humanity, with that divine joy, with that divine vision of the soul, which is bliss, which is creativity, which is intelligence to find solutions to any of life's challenges or obstacles or difficulties. If even a fraction of the society, those that come through an institution like this, can be equipped with that kind of skill, knowing that in all of the phenomena of life, all of the challenges, all of the difficult circumstances of body and family and mind and career and so on that life will throw at them, that there is a higher resource in their souls. That is what India has given to the world. That is what Sri Sri Paramahansa Yoganandaji has given to each of us, his chelas. And that is what we want to give to generation after generation of India's young people as they pass through these walls. So in closing, let me just express my prayer for this special day. May this school ever become an exemplary dispenser of the eternal how to live wisdom articulated millennia ago by the rishis, those illumined seers and sages who perceived the one truth of spirit behind all life, and whose wisdom was resurrected and echoed anew in our own time by the Kriya Yoga lineage of our Param Gurus and Gurudev Paramahansa Yogananda. May those eternal truths be the guiding light of all the boys and girls, the young men and women who come here to study, that they may conduct their lives according to the highest truths of existence that are embodied and embedded in the very structure of creation as the Sanatana Dharma by our infinite Lord and Creator. And may this beautiful campus become a citadel of light, of truth, of sattvic qualities, a beacon light to encourage the youth in these challenging and sometimes dark times, to explore that infinite potential latent in their souls. Let this school be a shining light in a world that is all too often enveloped in that shadow of tamasic qualities. And let all the facilities of this beautiful campus shine with that light of Satya. Let that light grow and grow and grow over the years, increasing, ever increasingly brighter and brighter as the years pass. So as we dedicate this institute of practical knowledge as well as divine knowledge to mold the lives of generations to come, that they, my prayer, and I ask you to join me in this prayer, that they may serve Mother India with the best that they have within them, and by extension, to serve the greater family of humanity, the greater family of humanity who, as I said, for millennia, has looked to Mother India as the spiritual lighthouse of the human race, the lighthouse of universal truths, the eldest sibling among the nations throughout the ages. In God's name, may these things be. Om, 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 Shanti. Jai Guru, Jai Hind.